Hello everyone, this is the story of what if Naruto and Tsunade shared a breath that changed everything. Breath. Cheryl-chan. Naruto. Wake up for training. Sakura's shrill voice entered one ear of Naruto and out the other. He flipped over and pushed a pillow on top of his face to block out the girl's rather irritating voice. Naruto. Wake up. I heard you. Just another minute. Naruto yelled back. He heard a puff of impatience from his door and knew he had won. Fine Naruto. But don't blame me if Kakashi happens to stroll into the room and dump ice water on you accidentally. Sakura replied innocently with an annoying high-pitched giggle. Naruto rolled his eyes in relief as he heard footsteps bound away. Naruto stretched his arms over his head and yawned. Opening his eyes, he lifted his arm over his face in order to block his eyes from the blinding sunlight that streamed into the room. Hiya, so bright. Naruto whined as he picked himself up from the warmth and comfortable bed he wished no more than to lie back in. Rubbing his eyes tiredly, he gasped at the numbing cold of the smooth wooden floor against his feet as he walked towards the closet. Flinging open the closet door, Naruto smiled in satisfaction at the loud bang when the door slammed against the wall. His smile only grew wider when he saw a large crack on the wall. Naruto grabbed the hem of his shirt and pulled it off him when the sound of the door flinging open nearly caused him to lose his balance. Bam! Naruto stared incredulously at Sasuke as the other boy stared at him back. They both faced each other frozen in shock. Naruto's arms still above his head with his shirt tangled around his wrists. He felt his face heat up and noticed with some satisfaction that Sasuke's cheeks had turned pink as well. Sasuke politely turned his gaze downwards to his feet away from the tantalizing view of Naruto's bare chest. Idiot Naruto. Why doesn't he lock his door? Sasuke seemed to have forgotten the fact that he was the one who had opened the door without knocking in his haste. Oh, you woke up. With that, Sasuke quickly turned around and hurried away. Very quickly. Naruto was speechless, his eyes opened even wider if possible, remaining unblinking. Naruto shook a little, realizing he had been standing there for a while. He blushed remembering the incident of the night before all too clearly. What the hell? Yesterday was nothing. Nothing. Naruto told himself. It was just the after effects of eating six bowls of stolen stew from the kitchen in the middle of the night out of boredom. Naruto shook his head, pulled the shirt that was still tangled around his wrists away and rubbed his temples for a moment. There was a dull throbbing at his head that was rather uncomfortable. Damn headache. Naruto suddenly felt a dizzying sensation in his head and a loss of balance in his feet. The loud pounds and painful throbs in his head only increased as he took in deep breaths of air. What the hell is happening to me? Naruto felt himself swaying a little back and forth, his brain losing contact with his numbing feet. His face didn't lose the furious red from the flush when he saw Sasuke. Naruto groaned and slapped a cool hand against his burning face. The action only brought a brief comfort. Before everything turned dark and he fell swiftly to the ground. The only thing he saw before he fell was a young man running towards him. Naruto. Naruto opened one eye slightly, his mind was not clear and his thoughts appeared as though it was jumble of green and red colors. Naruto moaned and felt his sight clear up, it was still the same. Green and red colors drowning him, he can't breathe nor can he move. God. He felt like sleeping again. Naruto. Wake up. Naruto mentally tried to punch whoever was endlessly calling his name 50 million times, but his arms felt like lead. He was too weak to even open his mouth and swear, much less hit anyone. Naruto felt his mind closing him on him again and knew that sleep was going to overcome him soon enough. Naruto really felt like throwing up now. If that person was going to say his name one more time, he'll legally get his beeping name changed. Naruto. That was it. Naruto snapped and suddenly woke up. His head felt like there were 1,000 hammers pounding his skull at once, his skin was feeling sweaty and clammy in hell. Whoever was calling him was going to be freaking murdered. Painfully too. Whaaaat. Naruto yelled, jumping up and ignoring his mind's sensible advice to lie back down. He stood up on his bed, his bare feet sinking into the mattress making him lose in balance. Naruto yelled out a curse as he fell back on the bed, his face flushed in making a fool of himself. He glared daggers at the woman in front of him. She had long black hair that was tied up in a tight bun behind her head. Her complexion was pale and ghastly and her robes were drabbier than any he has ever seen. She seemed afraid of him for a minute and Naruto grinned in his head at the terror he caused in the eyes of his tormentor of sleep. But she seemed to realize a few seconds later that it was only a child in front of her. Her rather soft features crinkled up in distaste as she stared blankly at the boy. I just wanted to know whether you were sleeping well. Naruto stared disbelieving at her. What the heck was wrong with this lunatic woman? She comes into his room, wakes him up and freaking asks if he had a good sleep. No, I'm not sleeping well due to the fact that I'm not sleeping at all. Naruto yelled in his fury. He felt his veins of his temple pulse wildly and for a brief moment. His sickness was forgotten. That was before the throbs came back in deadly pounds and Naruto found himself falling back onto his pillows. Naruto slammed his fists onto his head in attempt to make the pain go away. Where are the rest of them? Naruto groaned. You mean the rest of the visitors? No duh. They are still training outside but I'm sure they will be back in an hour or so. The reply came back softly. Naruto groaned loudly again. Damn, they left without him, and today was the day for Kakashi's so-called special training. It was the reason they came to the boring place altogether and he's not even there to learn it. He twisted his head back to the window and found that the sky was quite gray. He wasn't able to distinguish the time of day but the clouds. I have to get out of this place. Naruto muttered softly, so that the maid wouldn't hear him. He had to get out and find them. There was no way he was missing out on this training. It would be the only thing that wouldn't bore his brains out of the few days they are staying here. Naruto sat up again and shifted his body to put his feet on the cool ground. Lifting himself up with some difficulty, his arms lost strength and he fell back down again. His brows furrowed. Naruto pulled his attention towards the woman watching him with some amusement. Naruto scowled bitterly. You know what? You could come and try to help me, you know. Naruto said lowly. The woman shook her head, a tinge of a smile still on her lips. I've got orders to keep you in bed. You've got a fever right now and you should get your rest. But I need to get up. Naruto whined. Hope was almost lost. The maid shook her head. It's not like I'm going to do anything to kill myself or something. Naruto watched her. What are you going to do? The maid asked expectantly. Naruto sneered. Does a guy have to report to someone before using the can? The woman immediately blushed and walked over to help pull him up. Naruto mentally cheered. Success. Naruto got up and motioned for the women to go out for a moment. He feigned an innocent smile. Thank you, he said sweetly as he headed for tea. He door on the other side of the room entering the washroom. The minute the woman got out, he immediately leapt over to get his usual comfortable outfit out, yawning a little as he pulled on his pants. He decided that a little headache wasn't going to ruin his day. Everyone was just overreacting. Fever. Ha. Naruto ran over to the window and jumped out. Ignoring a piercing pain that shot to his head, he ran into the dense forest oblivious of the storm clouds gathering quickly above him. Sasuke wiped off the beads of sweat on his forehead as he continued to gather his chakra into his legs and kicking it forward. Slightly pleased at the whistle in the wind at the speed of his kicking, he forced his smile back down into an emotionless grim line and threw a careless glance at Kakashi. Cack. Ashi nodded slowly before he felt a droplet of rain fall onto his nose. Swiping it away quickly, he lifted his face heavenwards and realized a storm was soon to come. Dark gray clouds swirled furiously in the sky. Sasuke and Sakura looked up as well and walked over to get their things from under a large oak tree. There's a storm coming, we should get back now, Kakashi said, stating the obvious. This was a good day. It's too bad Naruto couldn't come. Sakura had been watching Sasuke as she always does. She noticed with some curiosity that Sasuke had paused for a moment at the sound of Naruto's name before he continued to gather his things up. Wow, Sasuke must really hate Naruto to flinch at the sound of his name. Sakura commented happily in her brain, but somehow, the shine that glittered in Sasuke's eyes for a moment before it went back to its dull cool form again disturbed her. Sakura continued to watch Sasuke before he turned around and caught her eyes for a minute. For one excited moment, Sakura found herself breathless staring into the stormy gray eyes before he turned away swiftly and walked a fair distance away from Kakashi towards the temple. Sakura couldn't fight the bright smile and the warmth that filled her face as she pulled back up from her crouch and followed the two males. She ran a little bit forward so that she and Sasuke walked side by side. Sly. Tly put down that Sasuke didn't notice her, she decided to be the one to strike up a conversation. That was some pretty tiring training back there, Sakura said cheerfully, careful not to direct it exactly towards Sasuke but at the same time making it sound like a casual statement. Sasuke didn't even spare her a glance. Sakura felt her happiness die down for a minute before she forced a grin on her face again. Giggle, it's a good thing that retard Naruto didn't come with us or he would have ruined our concentration with his ugly face like he always does, right? Sakura felt slig. Htly bad for insulting Naruto like that but a shared dislike may spark some interest in Sasuke. Sasuke shot her a withering cold glance. The only reason Naruto couldn't come was because he had a fever. Also, I despise people who talk behind others' back, Sasuke said firmly. With that, he quickened his pace. Sakura watched him walk away from her. Sasuke said he hated me. Just for Naruto. Sakura felt slightly hurt but she hurried as well. What do you mean you don't know where he is? Weren't you supposed to take care of him for me? I meant, us. Sasuke asked dangerously. Kakashi me up and patted him gently on the back to back him off. He watched the woman who was so overcome with fear that her face was several times even whiter than before and shaking like a terrified cat. Do you know where he went? Kakashi asked gently, concern in his voice. The woman calmed down a little before she met Sasuke's deathly glare again. I don't know. That boy, he left after I told him you were training. He told me he needed to go to the washroom. How was I supposed to know that he was going to go out? She wailed. Sasuke tensed. Naruto is outside with a high fever. He can why walk in his state and it's about to rain any second now. Kakashi pointed to the window. The woman followed his finger and shuddered as she saw all the trees leaning from the strong wind and the darkening sky. It's going to be freezing cold and in his state, he could even die. Kakashi said lowly. The maid started to sob and put her face in her hands. Sakura hurried to her and patted her hesitantly on the back. He could die. Sasuke froze. Naruto could die. Die. Slam. All three people currently in Naruto's room at the moment turned around in surprise as they looked towards the swinging door. Loud stomps were heard in the wooden corridors before they softened due to the dirt ground outside. Kakashi rushed to the window and saw Sasuke's hunched shape race into the forest in almost an inhuman speed. Kakashi sighed deeply, his chest heaving. Idiot. But his voice was not heard because the dangerous whistle of the wind and the soft pitter of the rain slowly increasing in volume had consumed it. Sakura could only stare out of the window and wish. Naruto, you idiot. You fool. Where the beep are you? I swear, if you don't come out right now, I'm going back. Naruto, you bastard. Sasuke ran blindly, noticing only at a small corner of his mind of the raindrops hitting heavily on his skin. Naruto, where are you? The rain began to come swiftly down in torrents, knifing through the air. With it was accompanied by the wind continuously hitting against Sasuke, almost making him lose his balance. But all this along made him run faster, his hair flapping loudly behind him and several wet strands flinging about his face. There was a deafening burst of thunder so powerful Sasuke's ears began to ring. But Sasuke was oblivious to this since there was a more ear-splitting ring in his head already. Damn it, where are you? Sasuke felt himself tiring and freezing cold. The rain soaked through his clothes and they hung evilly on his torso, sticking to his skin. Sasuke ran and ran and ran. The rain was not there anymore. The wind was not there anymore. The thunder was not there anymore. He only ran. Naruto. Naruto collapsed in exhaustion under a large tree when he heard the first clap of thunder. His head was thundering with pain and the rest of his numb body felt as weak as a kitten. Why the hell did he have to leave? It was so cold. He could barely even lift a finger. He was so very tired. Even when the freezing rain fell mercilessly on him, he was suddenly burning with heat. His felt as though he was engulfed in flames. The rain poured down and he wished desperately for someone to find him, even Sasuke. Especially Sasuke. Sasuke looked around wildly, his wet hair tossing around his head and sticking to his face. Sasuke flipped his hair out of his eyes in his haste. He couldn't see anything. The rain made it impossible for him to see. Naruto. Sasuke hollered with all his strength one last time before something caught his throat and he found himself choking with tears. Sasuke fell to the ground, not noticing the mud that had splattered onto his pants. He rubbed his face with his wrists. What was happening to him? Why was he acting like this? The only thing he wanted to do was get the painful jabs in his chest and the heavy lurches in his stomach. The only thing he wanted was to have Naruto safe by his side. Please God, Sasuke pleaded. He knew he was thinking irrationally, he knew he was way past doing anything that would be right of mind. But the only thing he could think to do was pray. Please God, help me find him. Help me find Naruto. He's sick, Sasuke pleaded. But then rain continued to pour down, the wind didn't not stop. Suddenly, in one agonizing moment, it was as though the world stopped and Sasuke caught sight of a tuft of blonde hair. He paused for a moment, water still dripping down his face, and his eyes blank and emotionless. He stood up quietly. The rain would have drowned any noise he made anyway. Time stood still for the eternity of time that it took for him to get to the boy under the tree. Sasuke stood in front of Naruto and took in everything he saw. The wet blonde hair that fell flat reaching his shoulders and on his face. The flushed cheeks and the erratic breathing that blew past the boy's white lips. The chest heaving slightly with every quick breath he took, and the uncontrollable shivering. He felt a tugging at his chest and he let out a deep heart-wrenching sob. Dropping to his knees in front of his arch-rival, he could feel the incredible warmth and emotion that swelled in his chest. Sasuke lifted one hand out and tenderly rubbed the frighteningly cold cheek of Naruto, sliding it downwards and back up again. He pulled the clumps of wet hair that had fallen in front of Naruto's face back behind his ears. Sasuke felt himself smile, but he was not entirely conscious about it. Because almost all his thoughts were concentrated on the boy in front of him. Naruto suddenly coughed loudly, a deep cough that rose grittily from his sore throat. Sasuke widened his eyes for a moment, and before he let his arms drop beneath Naruto's armpits and held the boy there. Suddenly, with one swift pull, he brought the Naruto to his own broad warm chest. The frail boy limply fell towards him. His head dropped heavily onto Sasuke's broad shoulders, his flushed face turned inwards so that his warm short gasps of breath were directed straight onto Sasuke's neck. Sasuke pulled his palms down to Naruto's waist and crossed them before he hugged the boy extremely tightly so that Naruto slumped back fell on the heat that radiated from Sasuke's body. Sasuke unashamedly clamped his knees around Naruto so that he would maintain balance. Only then did he relax, knowing that the boy was safe in his arms. He felt Naruto calm his shivering and his breathing came back in slow swift breaths and fell tired, his head against Naruto's raven dark hair clashing with a bright blonde. Know that it even mattered in the rain anymore. Why do you make me feel like this, Naruto? Sasuke sighed softly, half asleep. His eyes shut and he was left sleeping, Naruto close by him. Yes, it was still raining, but even as the skies were dark, the rain slowed only to a light drizzle. It wasn't even cold anymore. It couldn't be cold for the two embracing boys, both still unsure of their feelings but only sure of the fact that they only felt complete in each other's arms. That was when Naruto woke up and found himself leaning against someone warm. Even though he wasn't able to see quite clearly yet, he knew who it was. Sasuke. Naruto mumbled a little in his sleep and turned his bed. He felt quite remarkably comfortable and warm. It was so quiet and serene. Naruto wondered for a moment if he had died from his fever and gone to heaven. Deciding not to open his eyes just in case the peacefulness would be disturbed, he snuggled closer to his warm pillow and wrapped his arms snugly around it. There were a few minutes of calm and even breathing before Naruto paused. He rubbed the back of his arm against his so-called pillow and froze. When the hell did his pillow get hairy? Pulling his arm just a bit, he brushed the pillow with his hand and felt a bristly soft wet texture. He suddenly realized that the bed he was currently on was moving up and down steadily, like breathing. And his legs tangled within something. And there were two arms freaking wrapped around his torso. Naruto pulled open his eyes and found his face pressed closely against cloth, a clothed shoulder. Naruto didn't move, he was too terrified to check out who he was currently lying on. Okay. Breath Naruto. Breath. In 5 seconds, you will turn your head gently towards whoever's face and do whatever you do, which is go crazy. Naruto shut his eyes tightly, unwilling to move an inch. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Naruto hollered in accordance to his thoughts. With a swift pull of his head, he paused as he took in the dark hair, the sharp features, and let out a shrill deafening shriek. Ga-H. He leapt up and only thumped back on to his rival due to the fact that his legs were tangled with Sasuke's. Falling back heavily on the chest, he happened to startle the other boy out of sleep. Sasuke moaned a little as his eyebrows knitted. Naruto froze again, watching the dark eyelashes slowly flutter open. Sasuke rose his head and his eyes rolled towards the blonde presently straddling his chest. He blinked twice groggily. Sasuke gave him a rather bewildered look before. Some kind of bizarre sort of understanding swept through his face and he relaxed. Sasuke gave a soft grunt before his head fell back again and his chest rose and lowered steadily in sleep. Naruto read at him for a moment and he shook his head lightly at the surrealism of the situation. This is not happening, Naruto muttered softly to himself as he gently untangled himself away from the other boy. Finally tugging his right leg free from Sasuke's foot, he placed two fists of either side of Sasuke's face on the ground and pushed himself off gently as to not wake the sleeping boy. Naruto fell to the ground on the other side of Sasuke and lay there perplexed. What the hell had happened? His gaze fell onto Sasuke's head, which was currently facing the other way. Sasuke's dark hair was too USLED in a way that gave Naruto a terrible itch to run his fingers through it. His glassy-eyed gaze changed to a glower. I was in his beeping arms. What happened? Why can't I remember anything? Naruto knocked his skull with his fists of vain to regain the lost bit of memory. He ceased his fists after a few seconds and averted his attention to the clear blue sky. In spite of himself, Naruto felt his lips tug into a smile. It did feel okay, in Sasuke's arms. His broad chest gave him sense of security. Hell. What was his thinking? Naruto suddenly shook his head wildly and leapt up to his feet. Pulling his face into a nasty scowl. He was surprised at how natural it felt. Naruto nudged Sasuke's thigh quite rudely with his foot. Oi. There was no response. Oi. Wake up you bastard, Naruto said a bit louder, glaring at his rival with extreme loathing. There was still no sign of movement from the other boy before Naruto fumed and kicked Sasuke rather forcefully in the stomach. There was a sharp yell and in several seconds, Naruto doubled up in pain after Sasuke sent a rough jab to his stomach with his elbow. OWWW, what's wrong with you? Naruto groaned through his pain. Sasuke, he cast a disbelieving look to him before he brushed himself off quietly. You're the one who kicked me. Baka, he doesn't remember. Sasuke quickly snapped on a cool expressionless mask onto his face and tried not to look at Naruto, or it'll bring back memories of the boy's warm hard body in his arms. Sasuke felt his face grow hot and quickly looked down to the grassy ground, seemingly to find some fascinating interest in his feet. Naruto watched the other boy curiously. Nay, Sasuke, how in freaking hell did we get here? Naruto made a point of looking around him distastefully. Sasuke finally looked up, his face cold and his eyes steely as usual. He shrugged. You were extremely sick last night, and in your idiocy, you went outside and got yourself lost. I had to go and find you again, in the rain. Sasuke said this all really quickly. He emphasized on the word, rain, in order to indicate Naruto the trouble he had caused for him. Naruto widened his eyes in a mocking parody of wounded innocence. It's not like I told you to find me. Naruto ended with a sigh. Sasuke let his eyes go larger than usual before he looked away with barely concealed anger. The boy isn't even grateful. Why in God's name does it have to be him? Naruto glanced at him apprehensively, noting Sasuke's sudden ill temper. Sorry. But I'm not apologizing to you because I'm supposed to or something. But because I made the almighty Sasuke come out in the rain for me. Naruto said seriously, his smirk wiped off his face before he spurred out a hasty excuse to save his embarrassment. Sasuke's face hardened, but the tightness not altering the shape of his face, his lips grew thin as well. Are you thanking me? There was a short pause, that had lasted quite a bit of eternity for the two of them. Yes, Naruto replied softly. Sasuke could detect the smallest bit of sincerity in his voice and felt his features soften. He quickly looked away and shuffled his feet, apparently a little embarrassed of the outcome of the situation. Naruto, a bit miffed at Sasuke's lack of reply, quickly threw on a careless grin and stuffed his hands into his pockets in a sudden wash of shame. We should get back, Naruto retorted dryly as he made way in the direction he hoped was correct. Wait, slightly stunned, Naruto turned around with the clumsiness he should Avenue lost several years away and swaggered a little. Sasuke, purely out of reflex, grabbed Naruto's arm to steady him, his fingers clasping onto the damp cloth of his rival's sleeve as he pulled the boy back to balance. Sasuke smiled amusedly. Clumsy idiot, the temple's that way. Sasuke rolled his eyes northward pointedly before he began to lead them both back. Naruto blinked a couple of times, his smile loosed to a more natural fit. It was strange, while he would have naturally been agitated by Sasuke's comment. His eyes glanced over at the firm grip around his arm as Sasuke tugged him along the dizzying pathways through the trees. The grip was almost protective. There was a twinkle in his eyes that lightened the dull orbs to a happy sky blue, and Naruto pushed at Sasuke's shoulders playfully. Sasuke looked back, startled at the wild grin on Naruto's face, before a smile began to blossom on his own face as well, and they both chased each other back to the temple. Never mind the nervous jostling and the anxious tugging. The hand that was wrapped around Naruto's wrist was warm. And that was all that mattered at the moment. Why? A cheerful cry rang through the room as Sakura ran over to joyfully grab Naruto in a hug. Naruto winced a little as he threw a helpless glance at Sasuke struggling to breath. Naruto patted on Sakura's back lightly, rather terrified at the girl's sudden show of care. Sakura-chan, it wasn't that bad. Naruto stuttered carefully, enormously relieved when Sakura stepped back, rubbing her eyes and sniffling. It was bad, Naruto. Everyone was so worried. We even had to get Sasuke to find you, you idiot. Naruto paused a little at her words, a gleam of uncertainty passed through his eyes before he grinned warmly again and proceeded to ask Sakura where Kakashi was and whether they fired the stupid maid yet. Sasuke watched Naruto worriedly, before he glared openly at Sakura's bouncy self. He had caught the small pause of disappointment and surprise that had sparked in Naruto's eyes. It had been carefully concealed, but Sasuke could almost see the tug of sadness that had pulled at Naruto's heart when he assumed that his rival had been sent to find him, rather than from his own will. Okay. Correction. What he saw was most likely an illusion from what it hoped to see. But Sasuke felt like blurting out anyways the fact that he had been extremely worried about him, but that would most likely plant strange disturbing thought in people's heads, maybe that Sasuke might actually feel for him. Sasuke shuddered at the thought of explaining to Sakura about his emotions and confusion with his feelings towards Naruto, and could nearly vomit at the mere ponder of Naruto not being able to return what he felt for him. Maybe here were things that would be better kept secret. Sasuke shrugged as he tugged onto his shirt and followed soundlessly behind his two excitedly chatting teammates. Kakashi was really worried, Sakura remarked, knowing it would spark some shock in Naruto. Naruto stared at her incredulously. No way. Sakura nodded knowingly. He was practically yelling at the maid person for letting you go, Sakura exclaimed. Naruto blushed a little at this. It had been his own fault for tricking the maid and running out himself. He began to hope that the maid wasn't really fired. Then we had to wait for you and Sasuke all night. The tension was so thick in the air you could take a knife and slice through it. We all couldn't sleep a blink. Haha. Naruto threw his head back in a laugh. I'm sure you slept like a lamb, Sakura. You don't care about me. Naruto froze for a moment before he turned to her with a smirk. Of course, you must have been worried to death about Sasuke. Sakura shed bright red at his words before she turned her head and threw a quick glance at Sasuke. She shivered a little when Sasuke glanced at her sharply. She managed a small smile back, her heart all aflutter. I really was. Sakura sighed breathlessly. She quickly turned back around and smiled at Naruto, who was watching her intently. He was acting really weird and worried about you when he found out you might have died, you know. Sakura whispered solemnly. She watched Sasuke out of a corner of her eye to make sure he wasn't listening. Naruto continued to watch her intensely, but his cheeks had reddened a little to a pinkish tint. Well, I suppose he would have been a pretty heartless bastard to not care about a teammate dying. Naruto joked quietly. Sakura looked down at her feet. ND lifted her right hand to twist a couple of strands of hair around her fingers. We've never really talked like this before, have we, Naruto? Naruto nodded mutely. Sakura turned around to give him a sad smile. I never gave you a chance. I think that Sasuke-kun was the only one who did that. And I think that I'll acknowledge you too, for who you are, Naruto. Sakura stared back at her feet. Her bangs had fallen from her headband to cover her eyes. It was really when you were gone, when I realized just how important you are, to me, and to Sasuke. Naruto stared at her shocked before he started to stammer. Sakura quickly clasped her hand over his mouth and winked at him. She grabbed Naruto's hands tightly with her other hand. Go for him, Naruto. Sakura grinned rightly and gave a cheery wave before she bounced off. Naruto stood there in agonizing silence for a few seconds, painfully aware of Sasuke's presence behind him. His ears seemed to magnify every tiny sound, from the low hushed breathing of the other boy to the nearing footsteps. Step. Step. Naruto quickly shifted his feet around and faced Sasuke. He offered a small smile at the rival he envied so much. Sasuke watched him carefully, and Naruto's hands felt restless against the boy's close inspection. Like a cat studying his prey, Sasuke slowly opened his mouth to speak. Naruto. Kakashi walked in loudly. He paused for a moment when he saw the two tense boys in front of him before his eyes crinkled up merrily, but almost proudly at the distraction he had made. Naruto voluntarily took several steps back from Sasuke, only realizing then how close they were facing each other, and made a face at Kakashi. You didn't even bother to go out yourself to find me. You irresponsible man, Naruto said with a smirk, trying to divert the man's attention away from the thought of reasoning why he and Sasuke could have been standing so close to each other. Kakashi only shook his head. I don't go out and find brats. I leave their pretty little boyfriends to do the job. Naruto and Sasuke froze before Naruto let out a sound that could have been a laugh, a whimper and a cough at the same time. Go to bed, Naruto, Kakashi said quickly. Naruto jumped up angrily. What? I'm all better now. Besides, it's the morning. If you're all better now, Kakashi made a crude mimic of what Naruto said. Then why is your face all flushed and red? Naruto stopped quickly as he tried to find a way to explain his condition without admitting that it was actually because of the harsh effect Kakashi's earlier words had on him. He raised his arms up in defeat. Fine, I'm going to bed, but you can be sure I'll be cranky when I get out. Naruto raised a finger ratingly at Kakashi before he glanced nervously towards Sasuke and walked out of the room. Kakashi turned away from staring at Naruto's retreating form to gaze intensely at Sasuke. Sasuke sighed easily and walked towards the doorway. He'd set the trap, Sasuke. Sasuke turned around to question what he had said, but stopped when he saw Kakashi's face. Whatever. Sasuke stepped out of the room. Sasuke walked out of the temple and stepped onto the dirt ground. He paused for a moment and studied his surroundings. There were several bald men lurking around, but Sasuke could sense they were just the peaceful habitants of the temple. Sasuke continued to look around, remarkably aware of everything around him, from the almost impossibly blue sky, to the slight sweet-smelling breeze it teased him gently and caused the hairs to jump on his neck. He was also acutely aware of the warm rays of golden sunshine that poured down onto his bare back and sent tingles through every neuron of his body. But he didn't care for all this at the moment. His eyes finally caught sight of the young rose-haired girl he'd been trying to find and walked boldly towards her. Sasuke folded his arms across his chest as he planted firmly down his 2 feet in front of Sakura, who was leaning against a shady large tree. He didn't care to cease the anger that was flowing quite smoothly from his burning eyes and glared. Knowing that the girl would be intimidated and frightened, Sakura looked up curiously, her fingers still busily weaving the long strands of grass into a delicately woven rope. She blinked up at Sasuke, her eyes getting accustomed to the glare of the sunlight behind the shadowed boy, and smiled as his features came into view. "Sasuke-kun," she exclaimed quietly, without a hint of surprise, her eyes twinkling with an innocence Sasuke found extremely irritating. Sasuke continued to glower at her angrily, not moving an inch from his position in front of her. He was glad that he was blocking her sunlight. Girls and their stupid sun-tanning tendencies. He expected Sakura to cringe and whimper, or even at least shift nervously as every other person he knew would, well other than Naruto. But Sakura continued to gaze at him with large questioning eyes, and a small teasing smile tugging at her lips. Sasuke decided against his scare the girl and keep her away from Naruto plan and felt his fists tighten. "What were you talking about?" Sasuke asked lowly, his voice near a growl. He narrowed his eyes. Sakura began to smile at him pleasantly. "What are you talking about?" Sasuke felt rage building up inside of him, his jealousy from when he saw Naruto and Sakura whispering intimately with each other the seed of his instantaneously blooming animosity. He dropped his arms to his side and clenched his fists so tightly he felt his nails dig painfully into the skin of his palm. "You know what I'm talking about. Whatever crap you told him, why the hell is he acting so weird around me now?" Sakura now seemed genuinely surprised by his anger. She looked downwards with a slight flush on his cheeks. Her hands unconsciously began to tear the pieces of grass in her palms apart. She finally gathered up the courage to stare back at him boldly with white pursed lips. She felt her heart slowly tighten and loosen in her sudden fear of her teammate. She coughed. Whatever I told him is none of your business." She gasped in surprise when two arms slammed into the tree on either sides of her face roughly. She shut her eyes, willing the fear away. But her mind kept on replaying the whistle of the wind and the crunch of cracking bark in her ears. Sasuke found himself suddenly punching the tree viciously behind Sakura, his entire torso bent over so that he was face to face with the girl. Fury ran through his burning blood throughout his body, and for a brief moment, it was as though he was spirited out of his body and watching the scene below him. His shaking body was leaning over Sakura, shadowing her and leaving her trembling. Then he was back and suddenly disgusted with himself. But he didn't put down his arms, uneven harsh pants sound. Dead from his semi-open mouth, and his eyes were glazed with disbelief at his actions. "Never. To a teammate." Sasuke finally staggered back, nearly losing footing, and he stared at the girl in front of him. Sakura still had her eyes shut, her lashes fluttering as though she was about to burst to tears any minute. Sasuke quickly calmed himself and stood still. "Sakura," he called gently. Sakura opened her eyes a little and found Sasuke in front of her, looking adorably sorry for what he had done. She sighed and opened and closed her mouth several times as though she was torn between the choice of speaking or not speaking. She finally gazed at him seriously. "He's afraid of you." Sasuke stared at her for a moment, unable to believe her. Sakura held back a giggle, seeing how similar his reaction was with Naruto's. Did he tell you?" Sasuke asked timidly, a thin brow rising. Sakura ignored what he said and looked to her side, at the sky as her fidgeting fingers and hands began to tug at the grass. "Do you know I used to like you?" Sasuke widened his eyes, a little taken back by her comment. No. Sakura smiled contently. "I still do." Sakura looked up confidently at Sasuke's shocked face. "But I know that you will never share my feelings, because you hold them for someone else." Sakura sighed, her fingers dropping the grass she pulled up and tugging at another patch again. "That's why. I'll help you. Because Naruto is special to me too." "Sakura," Sasuke whispered. Tenderness in his heart had taken the place of his previous dislike for the girl. He walked forward to place his hands gently on the other girls, stopping them from pulling the grass that had already gathered in piles around her. "Don't do that. The grass will die." Sakura looked up at his handsome face, that face she had fallen in love with so long ago, and felt tears well up in her eyes. "I'll stop, and the grass will move on, healthy and strong." The eyes were dry once again and a genuine smile pulled at her face. Sasuke smiled as well, the smile contorting his features brilliantly to unfamiliar beautiful ones that were hidden before. This time, Sakura felt tears roll down her cheeks hotly onto her heavenward curved lips. I know. Naruto lay on his bed, looking at the peeling white of the ceiling. He lifted his head and dropped it back down onto the stiff pillow. I'm bored. Naruto called out tonelessly. He lifted one arm to stretch it slowly above his head, his last finger curling the end stretching out as far as possible as if to reach some invisible goal. He lay like that for a while, one arm reaching out with some strange expression on his face that resembled yearning. Naruto sighed after a few minutes, and dropped his arm back down heavily beside him with a thump that was muffled by the sheets. He turned over to his side and faced the wall. What do you want? A low voice came behind him. Naruto widened his eyes as he recognized the voice, shutting his eyes tightly all of a sudden. His entire body tensed as he miserably lifted an arm up to wave away Sasuke. Go away. I'm sick. Naruto snapped. Hearing a silence behind him, he managed a couple of fake coughs. You're lying, came the cool reply. Naruto twitched. He could almost see that damn smirk on Sasuke's face. Feeling a boost of confidence as his usual anger and annoyance towards his rival returned in all its familiarity, he flipped himself over to face the doorway. Naruto felt the fluster of excitement that tingled through his body when he saw Sasuke standing there, one hip raised jauntily and hands stuffed into the pockets of his shorts. He tried to sneer at the other boy, but only managed a GHT movement of lips before it fell to a frown. Naruto quickly looked away from the boy again. No, I'm not. Naruto quickly coughed up several fake coughs again for good measurement, but even to himself it didn't sound convincing. Sasuke stared at him, his expression hidden and impossible to read. Naruto watched mesmerized as he watched Sasuke slowly bring his tongue out to wet his dry lips. He shook himself as if to awaken himself from the entranced daze and glanced up to the ceiling. Go away. Naruto moaned again as he raised an arm to his forehead. He waved his free hand feebly again at his teammate. Go find Sakura or someone to annoy. I already talked to her. Sasuke answered. His voice was hoarse, as though he had been yelling a lot. Naruto finally threw his arm off his face and lifted himself up so that he was sitting upright on his bed. Are you leaving or not? Naruto asked lowly. He glared at Sasuke. No, Sasuke said blankly. Naruto made a face at him, pulling his lips back and sticking his tongue out. Whatever. You can watch me sleep then if you. His voice fell to a breathless gasp when Sasuke suddenly slid over beside the bed with a speed that came from years of training. I don't want to watch you sleep, but we can find some other use with your bed. Sasuke growled, a dangerous glint in his dark eyes. Naruto gulped as he leaned back away from his rival. Fa. He trailed off. Naruto suddenly glowered back defiantly. Blah. I don't want your dirty body in my bed. Sasuke raised a brow and smirked at him. Naruto flinched. What made you think what I was talking about involved me being in your bed? Sasuke asked coolly. Naruto continued to edge away little by little, unsure of the actions that this new Sasuke would take. Naruto stammered uneasily. Sasuke smiled at him, a large smile that showed his gleaming white teeth. It was almost predatory in a way, and Naruto suddenly felt a new kind of fear that blossomed at the pit of his stomach. Sasuke bent over towards Naruto so that his face was mere inches away from the other boys. Why don't you stick out your tongue again? I dare you to, Sasuke whispered roughly, his mouth hovering near Naruto's ear. Naruto shivered involuntarily at the warm breath that blew at his ear lobe and sent jolts of a combination of excitement and distress down his spine. Sasuke leaned in even more closely. Eyes narrowed dangerously and the tips of his lips twitched upwards. Naruto suddenly shoved Sasuke away, his face flushed as though he had painted his face a bright red. Sasuke stumbled back a bit with a slightly bewildered expression on his face. Naruto tried to will his blush away as he threw a book that happened to be sitting on the table beside him towards Sasuke. A book that Sasuke caught expertly with a quick swipe of a hand straight before it hit him squarely on the nose. What's your problem, Sasuke? Naruto cried out loudly. He threw an angry glare at Sasuke before he threw off his covers that gathered around his hips and stomped out of the room. Naruto kicked at the grass as he circled a safe distance around the temple. Damn Sasuke. Always thinking he can take control of me, thinks he's so powerful and great and perfect and wonderful and, I hate him. I hate him, I hate him, I hate him. Naruto repeated angrily, kicking even more furiously at the ground. Naruto found a nice shady spot under a tree that would be good shelter under the harsh rays of the sun. He fell down heavily onto the ground and lay on his back. He stared at the abs swaying in the wind over the thick branches above him. Small peaks of white sunlight shone brightly through the cracks of space between the thousands of leaves and fell in thin strands pouring in an almost liquid form on the places it touched. Naruto took a deep breath and exhaled loudly, blowing up wisps of blonde hair that fell onto his face and gently fluttered back down. Naruto could barely control the tremor of excitement that ran through his body to the very tips of his fingers. When he remembered the intense concentrated gaze of Sasuke's burning bottomless pits of eyes that seemed to penetrate his very soul, it had bore into him, inspecting and taking in everything Naruto wanted to keep hidden. Naruto clenched his fists, his fingers digging into his skin so tightly that it broke and blood began to seep out. Naruto wiped the wetness off his hands and sat on them. What was wrong with him? Naruto asked himself quietly. He was so different and direct. Naruto stared at he blades of grass that ripped like a wave as the breeze swept through. His eyes hardened again, growing as sharp as knives. I hate him. I had no right to confuse me like that. Naruto felt like amming down his fists and was grateful that he still sat on his hands. Horrible bastard. Can't do anything to me, thinks himself all high and mighty just because he helped me. Well, Naruto, is king to yourself a favorite pastime of yours? Or did you just go delirious in your sickness? A cheerful voice suddenly came out of nowhere. Naruto stiffened up, as he looked around to see who was talking to him. Up here, Naruto realized that the voice had come from above and glanced up to find Kakashi crouching on one of the branches of the tree and waving carelessly at him. Naruto mad, a rude finger gesture at him and grumpily slumped back on the tree. Naya, Kakashi, are you stalking me or something? Why are you always there at the worst times? Naruto whined loudly without looking at the man. Kakashi stared at him with his one eye, and ruffled his own fair spiked hair with his hand. Are you having problems? Naruto turned his head to look up displeased, pausing for a second. He shrugged and began to fiddle with his fingers. Did you notice how Sasuke has been acting weird since we came back? Naruto asked timidly. Kakashi raised his one visible eyebrow in interest. What do you mean? Naruto rolled his eyes and didn't reply. I'm sure he didn't mean what he did to you, Kakashi sighed. Naruto jumped and looked up angrily. Were you spying at me? Naruto spat, feeling a furious blush run through his face. Kakashi watched at him expectantly. In case you didn't know, you were speaking quite loudly to yourself. Kakashi retorted with a snort. Oh, Naruto said lamely. What did he do to you? Kakashi asked curiously. I don't know. Coming into my room without warning and throwing suggestive comments at me. Nothing much, Naruto muttered angrily. He refused to look at the other man before he heard deep chuckles and lifted his head. Are you laughing at me? Sasuke seemed extremely worried about you, when you got lost. I know that. I've had him and Sakura tell me that already. Naruto huffed. Kakashi was surprised as he swung his dangling legs up to the branch and crossed them. He actually told you that he was worried about you. Naruto blushed at his slip of words. Not exactly. I think he just kind of meant it. Well, he surprised all of us. Kakashi nodded as he said that. You're right though, Sasuke was rather worried about you, but not only when you got lost. But I've noticed in the past couple of months that he's been keeping a pretty close eye on you. Naruto stared at him. Are you trying to say in some weird distorted way that he likes me? Naruto said, his voice several pitches higher than usual. Kakashi shook his head. No, I'm not in position to say that and I'm not exactly sure yet myself. But I have reason to believe he doesn't have as much, we could say, dislike towards you as when he first met you. Naruto snorted as he pulled his legs to his chest and wrapped his arms around them tightly in a secure way. Dislike, understatement of the century, Naruto exclaimed. What I mean is, give him a chance, maybe make an effort to be his friend. He won't be one to take first step in offering his hand in friendship, he's too careful of being rejected. His fear from his past has kept him away from trusting anyone much. His past. Naruto was interested. I can't say anything about that either. Kakashi's eye twinkled. Naruto looked towards the temple thoughtfully before he turned back to Kakashi. Is it just me or are all of you trying to get me together with Sasuke? Naruto rubbed his head against the rough bark of the tree. Kakashi only laughed. Naruto frowned to himself, his features crinkling up dejectedly as he tread deeper into the forest. Deep in his thought, he still tugged at small branches and rubbed markings on trees with small stones on the way, not caring to make the same mistake as before. Hey, and have Sasuke save him again. Naruto laughed at that, though he didn't know why. After a minute or so, he bent down to grab a rock and began to rub it roughly against the tree. As the bark began to peel off, Naruto paused, his eyes glazing over in thought. His hand had seized minutely against the tree. With a leap, he swiftly ran up the tree and landed on one of its larger branches. He dropped heavily, leaning against the trunk while his legs dangled underneath him. He always enjoyed the atmospheric serenity that came from sitting in a quiet tree, shrouded from everything with its large cowering branches and leaves. Naruto ran, his hand thoughtfully against the pricks and creases of the tree, his lean fingers delving out of the little valleys and hells the rough bark created. Naruto remembered Kakashi's earlier words and gone to compensate actually taking up on his advice. Naruto suddenly caught himself and mentally slapped himself in disgust. Make friends with that asshole. No way. But, his past Naruto read to himself quietly with a curious glint in his eyes, the kind like that of a mouse in front of a mousetrap. Yeah, my past. Naruto's eyes rounded as he gasped sharply, swinging his gaze downward. His eyes narrowed and he pulled his face into one that depicted obvious dislike and loathing towards the boy standing several feet below. What the hell are you doing here? Naruto growled, glaring hatefully at him. Sasuke shrugged with that same cool I don't care about anything air around him, his unfathomable dark eyes peered at him. Naruto shifted uncomfortably. Making sure you don't get your idiot ass lost again. Sasuke replied evenly. Naruto looked at him incredulously and tightened his hands onto fists furiously. Shut up. Go away. I'm not a baby. Naruto yelled at him in a sudden wave of rage and fury. He swung his legs up onto the branch and looked away, trying to ignore his rival's presence altogether. Sasuke continued to watch him with those piercing eyes, not having had moved an inch. Naruto made a dirty face at him. He kicked at the tree angrily. Go away you bastard. I don't want to see your ugly fat-ass face. Come down. Sasuke ordered suddenly. Nah. Naruto shot him a disbelieving look before snorting and turning away. Beep you, so you can go and rape me again with your dirty disgusting ways. Naruto muttered bitterly. Sasuke stared at him quietly, unmoved by Naruto's remark. Come down. Sasuke paused thoughtfully. This was also the short amount of time for the alarming words, oh shit, to click into Naruto's head. Or I'll come up. Naruto barely took in Sasuke's words before he found the boy leaping up and landing beside him. The branch shook between the weight of the two, swaying a little and regaining its reliable sturdiness. Naruto stared at him with barely concealed shock before he made a terrible face. God Sasuke, ever heard of personal space? Naruto muttered as he yanked his legs away quickly and pulled himself back. He scooted away a couple of inches uncomfortably, before he found himself against the tree. He tried to fight down the urge to jump down and run away, but a flash of immense embarrassment from what Sasuke would think almost made him sick. Sasuke watched him for a moment with blank eyes before he let out a shuddering breath and sat down onto the thick branch as well. He leaned back slightly, perching himself up with his arms so that he was looking face to face with the other boy. Sasuke continued to gaze at Naruto unwaveringly. You are still angry about what had happened? Sasuke stated wearily. Naruto glared at him uneasily, torn between wanting to discuss and avoid the subject at the same time. No shit genius A1. I'm sorry, Sasuke said stiffly while grimacing. He was obviously having a hard time having these two words directed towards the gaping boy in front of him. Naruto was fully taken back, His eyes were as wide as saucers as he helplessly tried to find something to say in reply. His mind in a state of confusion and shock, it was put on hold and Naruto's eyes slid away instead in an almost rare show of shame and embarrassment. Shit. It was a few moments before a high-pitched giggle was ripped from his throat. Naruto quickly slapped his hand to his mouth distressfully. Soon, more chuckles and laughs rose from his thought. The pathetic attempt to muffle it was useless. Naruto's face began to redden in his laughter and he bent over to his knees to cover his face. But his back still heaved with every laugh and Naruto was caught in alarm, dumbfounded at the sounds emitting from his mouth. He was almost terrified to see Sasuke's face. Although Sasuke was a little terrified as well, his eyebrows rose in bewilderment as he watched the boy in a fit of laughter. He frowned at him indignantly. "It's not that funny," Sasuke told at him angrily, his eyes burning with rage. "I wheeze beeping chuckle * hate you." Naruto breathlessly read between harsh breathless and uncontrollable laughter. Sasuke didn't exactly know how to act in the situation and sat there instead, glaring at the other boy waiting for his laughter to pass. Naruto soon calmed down, though several snickers erupted every time he cast a glance at the other boy. Sasuke remained silent for a while, making sure Naruto had calmed himself. "What the hell was that?" Sasuke asked lightly, a look of heavy distaste on his face. Naruto blushed, though his face was already red enough from his laughing. He quickly looked down, so that his hair somewhat covered his face. "I hate you," Naruto muttered. Sasuke stared at him incredulously. "I realize that, but just because I hate ramen doesn't mean I'll go doing cartwheels and flips in front of everyone," Sasuke said dryly. Naruto snorted when an image of that appeared in his head. He looked at Sasuke in surprise. "Dude, you hate ramen?" Naruto asked him, his brows furrowed as his mind was unable to accept that. Could anyone hate ramen? Sasuke ignored him. "What the hell was that?" Sasuke repeated calmly. Naruto shrugged. "It was just stupid. How amazing it could be that you could actually apologize to me." "I am sorry," Sasuke said again. This time, Naruto studied him carefully. Yes, he did look sorry, but he looked unperturbed as well. This fact distressed Naruto a little because of the sureness that emitted from Sasuke's little smirk. The confidence Sasuke had in his sharp eyes that Naruto was actually that way. Naruto frowned to himself. He wasn't that way. He still liked Sakura. She was cute, if not a little overly perky. Naruto stuttered. Sasuke cut in. "Let's just pretend it never happened, alright," Sasuke said. "Unless you want it to." Those unperturbed eyes told Naruto at the same time. Naruto shivered a bit, noticing slightly the faintest of smiles that crawled off Sasuke's lips. He tensed, suddenly hit by that disturbing feeling again. As though it wasn't really Sasuke at all. Of course, the boy was sitting right in front of him in flesh and blood. But Naruto wrung his hands in confusion before he shook the thoughts away. Perhaps it's just that Sasuke had been hiding this new persona all along underneath that cold exterior. Naruto was still unsure of whether he liked this or not. Sure, Naruto answered uneasily. Sasuke watched him closely for a moment before he leapt off the tree and walked back. "Come down soon, we're almost eating," Sasuke called to him without looking back. "Hi," Naruto answered softly, his mind jumbled up more than ever. When Naruto got back for supper, even the food tasted bland to him. Because he did happen to notice the curious glances Sasuke kept on throwing at him. Also how every time Sasuke realized that Naruto caught him staring at him, he would immediately stare back down to his plate in a sudden case of shyness. Naruto scratched his head a bit, not before throwing dirty looks at Sakura and Kakashi, who happened to be throwing at him knowing glances instead. The hell, Naruto fidgeted with his food a bit, pushing it around on his plate. Supper was a quiet affair and no one spoke much. A sudden change from the usual lively conversations they had. Naruto felt out of place. So what will we be doing tomorrow?" Naruto asked quickly, desperate to creak the silence. Sakura answered instantly. "We're resting. Kakashi-sensei told me that we could do anything we want." She smiled, though it was almost plainly seen that it was forced. Everyone smiled at her in turn. Sickle. Why forced smiles that made their faces hurt? Not because they disliked Sakura of course, but because of the tension that had crept its way ever since Naruto had gotten lost. There was that damned silence again. Naruto's insides churned unpleasantly and he quickly got up to his feet with a shove of his chair. Everyone looked at him. Naruto swallowed wearily. "I'm going to sleep," Naruto announced. Loudly without looking at anyone and stomped his way out. This proved to be an exit for the rest of them. Sasuke made his way out too. I think I'll go sleep too." Sakura hurriedly left next, taking her plate with her. Kakashi sat at the table alone with an amused glint in his eye. "They can never cease to weird me out." Naruto fell back on his bed, trying to ignore the memories that rose from the last time he was in his room. His sheets were still tousled and Naruto made an effort of straightening them a bit even though he knew he was going to sleep in a while anyways. "Hey," Naruto groaned as he recognized the voice and made no effort in facing Sasuke. He continued to stare at the ceiling again. "Must you come and find me in every waking moment of your life?" Naruto whined. He didn't have the patience nor mental ability to deal with his rival right now. "Like you'll have the privilege of facing me all that time," Sasuke said quietly. Naruto sat up and faced the boy, who was standing in front of the doorway. Because the room was dimly lit at the time, and the sun was setting around, the light behind Sasuke almost looked as though it was rather shining from him. Naruto's breath hitched, hit by a sudden sense of déjà vu. He quickly took in a quick breath of air and huffed impatiently. "What is it this time? Come to apologize to me again?" Naruto sneered. "By the way, I don't think that I mentioned before that I will not forgive you." "Never," Naruto shouted all of a sudden, caught in sudden confusion. Because to him, it was as though Sasuke was switching back and forth. It didn't make a lot of sense and Naruto found his head reeling. It was as though he was caught suddenly in one of those weird TV sitcoms, where it was almost as though something was vaguely wrong. But you can never be sure of it. Because it kept on leaving these brief clues everywhere, but not close enough that you would actually very much take notice of them, or that it was too far to take notice of them. It was a small feeling, at the edge of your mind, which you just can't see clearly but it's there like an itch, a mosquito bite that can't be scratched. "What on earth are you talking about?" Sasuke said, looking at him in bewilderment. "You're not making sense at all." Naruto glared at him angrily, knowing that he didn't really hate Sasuke, but he hated the boy for doing this to him. "Shut up. You're making no sense," Naruto yelled. "And I don't know what's wrong with you, you changed so much. First you save me, then you freaking harass me and apologize. Now you pretend nothing happened at all. You make no sense, not me." "Nothing makes sense now." Sasuke stared at him, beginning to make his way towards him. "Wah!" Naruto quickly jumped off the bed and pushed Sasuke forcefully to the ground. "I hate you," he yelled furiously and quickly ran out of the room. Sasuke lay sprawled on the ground, staring after the retreating boy. What the heck was that? Naruto growled to himself angrily, unsure of what to do. How many times has he rushed out of the stupid temple anyways, only to find himself wandering around a stupid forest with nothing to throw his frustration upon? He knew he had overreacted and he wouldn't exactly blame Sasuke if he thought that he was some lunatic maniac right now, but somehow, he still believed it was Sasuke's fault. Naruto tried to dismiss it as his childish stubbornness to push the blame on other people, but he had grown out of that years ago and can safely say that he could judge things a little more fairly now. Yes, a little. It was perfectly hard to believe so many things could have happened in one day. Why is everything happening all at once? Why is everything going wrong at once? Beep. I hate him. Naruto snarled as he was almost blinded by rage, slamming his fist into the tree with a surprising force. He continued to walk swiftly, not noticing his bloodied hand, which he pushed back into his pocket. He also didn't notice the rough fist indent that had pressed its way deep into the tree. But someone else did, and that person was chuckling merrily. When Naruto got back, no more words were passed between the two rivals. Kakashi and Sakura remained worried at the sudden change. No longer did Naruto attempt to rouse annoyance out of Sasuke. He just flat out ignored Sasuke's presence. Sasuke continued to watch Naruto carefully though. Even if it was carefully concealed, Kakashi could see the flicker of worry in Sasuke's usually cool eyes every time he risked a glance on the other boy's direction. But Naruto remained true to his words. It really seemed as though he genuinely hated Sasuke, and the stoic boy was certain not to make the first advance in fixing their broken relationship. The remaining 2 days at the temple was quiet and restful. For everyone else other than Sasuke and Naruto though. Kakashi knew of the troubled mumbles and consistent tossing and turning in sleep, for both of them. Times when they were together were quiet affairs where voices were clipped the few times they were heard. Neither of the rivals acknowledged each other's presence. On the day they trained and Kakashi had ordered them to have a brief fight with their newly learned techniques, he had hoped to mend the hopelessly ruined relationship they had. But barely casting a mere glance at each other, they both downright disagreed and proceeded to work alone instead. As much as Kakashi felt sympathy for Sasuke, for he had reason to believe this matter wasn't so simple as a small disagreement between the two. If it had been, Naruto would have forgotten everything. Have a good meal. Kakashi was most concerned about Naruto. He almost became a double of Sasuke. His eyes had low, saint the defiant cheeriness and morphed into 2 orbs of dull emotionless blues. He was not lively as he was before, and neither did he pick fights. When he worked without speaking, and when they were left alone, he would either lock himself in his room or silently creep outside to who knows where. Naruto was losing himself, and Kakashi really began to wonder what exactly had happened. They went back to the village and everyone went back to their respected homes. Kakashi hurried to Iruka to find the mystery behind all this. "Nay, Kakashi, what a surprise to see you," Iruka saw it tiredly as he opened the door a crack, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "And at 3 o'clock in the morning too. How very considerate of you. But may we leave this matter in the morning, when the sun is shining and the birds are singing and people aren't willing to kill anyone who would disturb them from their well-deserved sleep." Iruka shut the door quite rudely before Kakashi could get a word out. Kakashi pounded impatiently at the door again. He heard with a satisfied smirk hurried footsteps towards the front door. Iruka swung open the door and his eyes swept over Kakashi with an irritated expression. His irritation quickly changed to concern when he saw the grave seriousness that was embedded on Kakashi's half-hidden features. "Come in," Iruka sighed as he moved aside and gestured his slim arm languidly towards the couch. Kakashi walked in with a murmur of thanks and fell back onto the lavender-colored chair. Iruka took seat in front of Kakashi and peered at him curiously. "I just came back from my little vacation with my team," Kakashi stated blandly. Iruka nodded slowly. And, Kakashi took a deep breath before starting. "I know I shouldn't be as worried and flustered as I am now. I mean, on the outside, it seems like a slight disagreement between them, but I can't help but think there is something very wrong with the picture herein." "What are you trying to say, Kakashi?" Iruka interrupted, patting the other man's arm to calm him down. He felt extremely uncomfortable. It wasn't often when Kakashi was actually this concerned about something. Kakashi looked away as though embarrassed. "It's about Naruto and Sasuke," Kakashi continued on about how strangely they've been acting. But the time he finished, Iruka furrowed his brows thoughtfully. "It seems to me that it's just another common disagreement between teammates, like you have mentioned before. I'm sure that they'll get over it soon enough. Naruto is known for his hot-headedness." Kakashi shook his head. "It's not only that, there is just something I'm missing," Kakashi argued. "I feel as though someone's there watching us right now, laughing at us, because he's hiding something from us, and it's going to harm Naruto. I just know it," he explained worriedly. Iruka continued to think for a while, his lips white and his body tense. "Besides, Naruto may lose his temper easily. But he is not one to hold grudges for so long. And he's holding so much anger within him right now. He's changed." Iruka, Kakashi muttered. "How about this? I'll go over to Naruto in the morning and talk to him. I'm sure he'll tell me what happened," Iruka said slowly, thinking his words over. It was true, there was certainly something wrong, and Kakashi was not one to lie or assume. Kakashi suddenly grabbed his sleeve, his eyes darting back and forth worriedly from the door to Iruka. "Go now, Iruka. I'm really worried about this," Kakashi said lowly. Iruka smiled lightly and stood up, gently brushing away Kakashi's grip but grabbing the man's hand in the process. Kakashi looked almost startled for a second, but his features softened at the warmth of Iruka's hand. He smiled tiredly, seemingly a lot older than he really was. I guess I'm overreacting, am I? He finally asked somewhat sheepishly. Iruka smiled back. Not overreacting. Just overly concerned. And it's not always a bad thing. But I think we should give Naruto right now his rest. Iruka pulled his hand away to nudge at Kakashi gently at the shoulder. And I think you should give me my beauty sleep right now. Kakashi chuckled merrily. His usual self shone brightly as he shrugged his worries off and walked towards the doorway. Though his hand lingered on the knob as he pulled the door open. He glanced back at Iruka for a minute, opening his mouth as though to say something. He shook a bit like he was rethinking whatever was about to come out of his mouth and grinned instead. Go have beauty sleep or whatever now, but remember, go talk to Naruto tomorrow. I personally think that you will be able to figure all this out. Iruka waved him away with mock impatience. Okay, go now. Or I won't be able to wake up tomorrow. Kakashi glided away quickly with a cheery wave, leaving Iruka alone with troubled thoughts and troubled feelings. Asterisk 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 8. Iruka knocked at the door 3 times and waited at the front step for Naruto to open the door. He was actually planning to meet his former student anyway. It has been quite a while since they had last talked. The door opened slowly and Naruto peered out hesitantly. His eyes stopped at Iruka and darted wildly around a moment. Iruka knew for a fact that T had meant Naruto was hastily trying to find an excuse to not talk to him. Hey, can I come in? Iruka started. Naruto sighed. Hey. Naruto answered dully as he opened the door a little more widely and moved aside. Iruka went in, noting to himself that it was very true, what Kakashi had said. Naruto's eyes really had dulled exceptionally, and the dark rings under his eyes certainly proved it. He's been having restless nights the last few days. Iruka saw Naruto hurry to the kitchen as he got in and looked around for a place to sit. The place was very clean, a large difference from the last time he had stepped into the house. Iruka shifted uncomfortably. He had been to Naruto's home a number of times. But he felt so alien in it now. He never realized that messiness could be rather welcoming sometimes. Naruto walked out tiredly, swaggering a little as he tried to balance the 2 cups of tea on the tray and placed it onto the dining table. There was only one seat there and Naruto quickly dragged a stool over for himself. Iruka walked over to take his place at the table. He took the cup and took a long tentative sip out of it. Naruto watched him carefully. Is there a reason you have graced me with your presence? Naruto said coolly. Iruka winced at the coldness of his comment. Yes, there was certainly something going on here. He decided to start off casually. Your home seems a lot cleaner now. Iruka fought down to urge to say, colder. When did you fix it up? Naruto continued to stare at him with those steely eyes. I cleaned it up when we got back yesterday. But to the point please Iruka. Iruka watched Naruto with a twinge of disappointment. That cold politeness, it was not Naruto at all. Iruka, when have you stopped calling me Iruka-sensei? Iruka asked amused, though he didn't really feel that way inside. Naruto smiled a very non-Naruto smile. I have no reason to. You are no longer my teacher. Did something happen during your little trip? Iruka asked straight out. To the point, he said, well now he is. Naruto's cold expression flickered for a second to an unfathomable look, but it returned to its usual state immediately. Nothing of course. Naruto quickly replied. With that, he began to get up and gave a sorry smile. A smile that didn't reach his eyes, Iruka noticed. I'm sorry, I have something to do right now. So will it be okay if I am left alone? Naruto said softly as he began to walk towards his room. Iruka stood up as well behind him. What happened between you and Sasuke? Iruka called. Naruto suddenly froze and tensed up. How did you know? Naruto asked quietly. not facing Iruka. I don't know, but I want to know. Iruka told him sincerely. I am so worried about you. Kakashi came to me. Naruto suddenly whirled around in fury, his eyes blazing, and Iruka hoped that the old Naruto was back. Except, Naruto quickly turned around again as he regained composure. Kakashi. Told you, that bastard. Naruto stood there for a minute in silence before he walked into the room and shut the door quietly. Iruka stared at the door for a few minutes. Yes, there was definitely something wrong with Naruto. And the best thing to do now is to talk to Sasuke. I have no idea what is wrong with him. Sasuke answered coldly. Iruka sighed impatiently. You told me that 5 times already. But I'm asking you if you remember if you've done anything that could have caused him to be like that. Iruka said. Sasuke stared at him bewilderingly. Why do you automatically think it was I who made him like that? I don't. It's just that it's you who he's been acting particularly cold to. Iruka explained quickly. Sasuke bit his lip thoughtfully as he tapped his fingers against the table. Iruka was getting really irritated with Sasuke. He was almost as bad as Naruto. Actually, Iruka thought, well, he was worse. At least Naruto offered him tea, which was frighteningly polite of him. Iruka shuddered for a minute, feeling as if he didn't really know Naruto at all. Well, perhaps he was mad at me because I found him when he was in the forest while sick. Maybe he couldn't stand the fact that he owed me something. Sasuke said slowly. Iruka noticed a twinge of anger in his voice. Yes, Kakashi told me about that. But is there anything else? Right before he yelled that he hated me, he said all this weird stuff about how I was harassing him or something, then apologizing and whatever crap. I just assumed he was going a little crazy, which isn't exactly surprising when it comes to him. Iruka found this information highly interesting. Did you do anything he said you did? Sasuke immediately blushed, to Iruka's shock. And no, of course not. I didn't even see him. Since I helped him back when he got lost, I went to talk to Sakura and spent the rest of the day trying to find him. When I did find him, he was already like that. Sasuke stuttered defiantly. Iruka raised a brow. Was he telling the truth? Sasuke sharply looked away and got up in the same fashion as Naruto. I'd appreciate it if I had some time alone, please, he stated. Iruka got up and bowed slightly. Sasuke did the same, although much more stiffly. Thank you for your help, Iruka said as he walked out the door. You're welcome, Sasuke answered curtly before he slammed the door shut. Iruka scratched his head for a minute as he thought this all over. There was definitely something wrong, and it isn't only about the two. There was something else that just seemed out of place in Iruka. I was determined to find out what it was. There was a low steady knocking at his door and Naruto climbed out of bed tiredly to answer it. It was in the middle of the night. Who the hell in their right mind would visit him? Naruto shuffled to the door and called through the door. Who is it? There was a short silence. It's me. Naruto's eyes widened and he swung open the door hastily. As he had expected, Sasuke stood there, looking rather smug if he could say so himself. Naruto glared at him. What are you doing here? He barked, resting his hands on his hips. Sasuke looked up, with a sorry expression on his face. Naruto didn't care to register this in his mind. I wanted to talk, Sasuke said softly, the cool night breeze lifting his dark strands up slightly. Naruto paused for a minute. He had been meaning to talk to Sasuke anyways, about what had happened. I hope you're not expecting me to apologize or anything, and Sasuke lifted his eyebrows in surprise, and lifted his arm to brush his hair aside. No, of course not. I'm here, just to talk, he said again quietly. Naruto watched him suspiciously. Naruto looked at his watch, 2 o'clock in the mo. Rning Sasuke-kun, that's rather strange of you, Naruto said slowly with a small smirk. Sasuke's hair had once again fallen on his reddening face due to the breeze, but he didn't care to brush it away. Naruto's hand twitched with a sudden impulse to push it aside to reveal those dark eyes again. Shit, Naruto, just let me in, Sasuke said lowly. Naruto was pleased at the abashedness that he had roused out of Sasuke. He thought for a minute and decided to let him in. When they got in, Naruto didn't offer him a seat, so Sasuke stood instead, gently closing the door behind him. Naruto raised a brow at him. feeling suddenly as though their usual roles were switched, as though he was now the dominating cool Sasuke while the boy in front of him was a mirror copy of him. It was a weird feeling and Naruto began to enjoy it. "What's there to talk about, Sasuke?" Naruto said quietly in an almost teasing tone. Naruto saw Sasuke hunched-shaped shrug and felt rather uncomfortable with the dimply lit room. With the moon its only source of light, he made his way to the dark silhouette of the lamp beside him and switched it on. A warm orange glow flooded the room and Naruto gestured towards the dining table where he was talking with Iruka earlier. Sasuke followed his lead and they both sat down stiffly. "I wanted to talk about, Sasuke seemed a little stuck with his words. Naruto sat silently, wondering if he was actually dreaming or not. Naruto. A sudden wave of nausea hit him and Naruto swallowed back the urge to throw up. He began to realize that sometimes when he was with Sasuke, he felt a sudden urge to vomit. Sasuke seemed to notice how Naruto paled and leaned over. "Are you okay?" Sasuke asked lightly, concern in his voice. Naruto felt very ill now, even worse that Sasuke's face was only mere millimeters away from his face. But there was something seriously wrong with this scenario. Was Sasuke actually asking if he was feeling alright? Naruto blinked, how unreal that sounded before another wave of unbearable nausea hit his stomach. There was something horribly wrong, something he was missing and Naruto understood that now. But he slowly winced, hissing in pain as he clutched at his stomach. It feels like there's something tearing at my flesh right now. It hurts so much, Naruto whimpered as he doubled up in pain and wrapped his arms around. It hurt so much. There was something ripping through him, trying to get out and then, God, it hurt. But he had to know. Who are you? Naruto asked raggedly with clenched teeth. There was a dead silence for a moment, with only Naruto's harsh uneven breaths to break through the air. But Naruto's ears were ringing, the blood in his head rushing about as though it was being pulled apart. Pain. So much pain. Sasuke slowly got up and walked over to Naruto. He didn't speak and Naruto couldn't see his face at the moment. Because the light didn't reach his face, it didn't reach his eyes. He could see him smile though. A sly evil smile that he never knew. God. Sasuke. It hurts. Naruto rasped out again, his voice hoarse and broken. Naruto's eyes widened as Sasuke's fingers suddenly rested under his cheek and his face was tilted upwards. Naruto's stomach lurched and he gave a startled gasp, partly out of the pain but mostly because of what he saw. Blackness. Sasuke swiftly bent down, but his face, it was still dark. The light should have been shining on his facing. Naruto was supposed to see his face. But it wasn't there, it was shadowed. Shadowed. Even in the light. Naruto looked at the face hovering for a few seconds above him. He took in the darkened features that he could still pick out and that damn smile. The perfectly straight teeth that glinted dangerously and the lips that were pulled up in a wicked sneer. Naruto was stunned with shock and horror, because he couldn't tear his eyes away from that face. He almost failed to hear the harsh whispery words that slowly wrapped around him with its cold relentless fingers and choked him. It hurts, does it? He almost failed to realize the lips that were suddenly crushed against his own roughly. Almost. Naruto cried out angrily, his previous burning pain nearly forgotten as he tried to push the other boy away. A heavy new kind of pain furiously hit him again. He couldn't breathe, his they were churning and tightening and God, he was going to be ripped into bits and pieces. Those lips that were pressed against his, they radiated such burning unbearable heat, Naruto felt it course through his veins as it shot all through his collapsing body. There was a sudden explosion in his body that was more painful than anything else, it was so terribly and utterly painful. A moan was torn away from his throat, clawing at his flesh in the intense agony, his mouth vibrating against the other. That fire, it wasn't only from Sasuke. It was from him, rising and burning and engulfing everything inside of him. His body was an inferno of fire. Naruto woke up with a jump. His pajamas stuck to him like a second skin due to the wet sheen of sweat that had covered his body. He quickly set his fingers against his lips and shut his eyes tightly. That pain, it felt so real. Naruto quickly flung his damp sheets aside and relished in the coolness that had graced his flushed body. Naruto breathed in deeply, his head bowed. His hair hung in clumps that fell limply against his face. He choked in a sob and wiped his wet cheeks with his sleeve. He couldn't remember his dream though. It was so important. He knew that but just couldn't remember it. All he could grasp out of it was an intense pain. Naruto looked out the open window beside his bed into the night sky. The moon hung a softly glowing orb in the ink-black sky, but there was not even one single star in sight. Naruto trudged along the path, kicking the dirt as he walked. He was going to some weird group survival trip with his old classmates. It had been arranged by Iruka so that they could test out their newly learned skills or something. Naruto had been reluctant to go, but something along the lines of Iruka threatening to never buy him ramen again forced him to go to the stupid camping trip anyways. Naruto looked up at the skies, which was a bright blue. There was not a cloud in the sky. Naruto made a face. It's going to be so damn hot today. When he arrived at the small grass area just at the edge of the forest where he had been told to meet, he found his old classmates standing there, all 27 of them. Yes, he was feeling peachy, just peachy, despite the fact that his left eye didn't seem to want to stop twitching. All of them were talking to each other excitedly and friends who haven't seen each other in a long time chatted like they hadn't separated at all. Naruto found Sakura at the corner speaking to Ino. They were arguing, not at all shocking. Naruto caught the sight of Sasuke as well sitting at the rock by himself, all isolated and alone as he always was. Naruto wanted to gag. But he made a point of not acknowledging his teammate at all and stood at a side quietly. A loud clap interrupted the excited chattering and everything went silent. Iruka stood on top of a small boulder with his back facing the opening of the forest, smiling brightly at his former students. I'm glad you all arrived today. Iruka's gaze settled on Naruto as he spoke and Naruto looked away quickly. We have been blessed with a beautiful day today and I believe we should use it to our advantage. Iruka started, and the excitement in his students grew. This event was something me and Kakashi-sensei planned up to test your newly learned skills that your team masters have taught you. You will be paired up to venture into the forest and stay there for 2 days and 2 nights. As you all know, this forest has been forbidden to you for a very good reason. Strange things and animals dwell inside that would be quite threatening to your safety. So I'd advise you to not let your egos bloat to the size that they would lead you to wrong decisions. Iruka paused effectively, and murmurs in the crowd rose to a hum. But this should be a fun event, a good chance for those who haven't yet pushed their skills to their fullest potentials and a good test for your navigational skills. Whenever one of you may need serious help, give a good yell or whistle and we will find our way to you. Iruka smiled and pulled a list out of his back pocket. This list of partners took some time for M.E. and Kakashi-sensei to think up of and I'm sure that some of you may like it and some of you may not. But we are confident on our choices. Iruka looked down onto his list. First pair, Yamanaka Ino and Haruno Sakura. He went on down the list for a while. Naruto found himself crossing his fingers and wishing hard that he wouldn't be paired up with Sasuke. Not Sasuke, not Sasuke. He muttered quietly. Uzumaki Naruto and, to this, Naruto looked up to find Iruka staring down at him with worried eyes. Nara Shikamaru. Naruto exhaled in relief and caught Shikamaru's exited grin. He smiled back. It turned out that Sasuke ended up with a Murame Shino, which was reasonable because they were both rather introverted and probably glad since they didn't have to worry about the other getting into their businesses. But every time Naruto glanced at Shino, he couldn't explain the slight jealousy that filled him. When Iruka finished and waved for the start, Shikamaru ran over to Naruto flashing him a smile. Naruto realized that the hostility of some of his classmates had before for him had diminished. He wondered why. Hey Naruto, we're partners Shikamaru said, jogging up to stand beside him. They both looked up at the tall towering rolls of trees before them and Naruto peered at the other boy nervously. Scared, Shikamaru paused before shaking his head. Nah, you. Naruto shook his head as well. Nope. As they began to walk around the edge to search for another entrance into the forest where their classmates haven't gone through already, Naruto noticed at the corner of his eye that Sasuke and Shino had ran in already, separately. He should have known anyways. Sasuke was never really for the team thing. Shikamaru waved for him to catch up as they stood beside a large bush. The forest is really dense on the outside, the trees are much too packed in tightly together for us to squeeze in. But I figure we can crawl through the bushes, he said uneasily, not too sure of his idea. Naruto shrugged. Yeah, sure, he said carelessly, noticing how Shikamaru's face brightened as he did. Naruto made the firm conclusion that Ino didn't really agree with his ideas very often. They both got down to their knees and brushed away the first leaves before the dove in. Naruto crawled quickly, ignoring the painful scratches and marks the sharp branches mad on his arms as he made his way to where he hoped is inside the forest. He heard the rustling of leaves every so often behind him and knew Shikamaru was close behind. He was more than relieved when they finally got out. Though bloodied and scratched, Shikamaru came out seconds after he did and they both brushed off the leaves and thorns on their clothes. We just had to choose the thorn bush, didn't we? Naruto muttered darkly, wincing as he pulled out a thorn that had pushed in deeply into his arm. Shikamaru answered with a yelp of pain as well, and tried to get out the twigs that were tangled in his hair. Naruto looked around the forest. It was almost like any other except trees huddled densely together as though in fear. Naruto understood why it would be impossible to train in such an area. It was because there was hardly any space left. The trees shot up high on top of them, but only the tips of the trees were full of leaves and life as they are the only part that can receive sunlight. Naruto shivered. The bare skeletons of the trees that surrounded him, they reminded him of cages that would trap him and never let go. Beside him, Shikamaru shuddered as well. As they ventured in deeper, the forest began to age. The younger sketetal trees were gone and replaced by enormous dead weights of old trees, standing there in a wise kingly fashion as though they've been there since the beginning of time. Century-old vines twined their way around the wizened rough bark of the thick trees, and dull green moss planted itself nearly everywhere. There were small buds of tree unglings as well as curiously shaped leaves that yawned out of the ground in bright greens. Naruto and Shikamaru had to climb up with some difficulty over the huge roots that had pulled themselves out of the moist soil. Wisps of light that had been able to pass through the thousands of leaves sheltering them from the sun ran across the leaf-covered ground like cool waves of water. And drips of what sounded like morning dew fell from surrounding bushes. There was a low hush around him, as though nothing at all has ever disturbed the enchanting place to learn of the secrets that dwelled in the very whispers of the trees. This place is old and wise, full of dangerous secrets of the past. Shikamaru whispered, and Naruto nodded in agreement. They stood still, lifting their heads to admire the awe-startling immaculate beauty that was around them. It's so beautiful though, like some hidden place where man has never been able to find and therefore not destroy the natural beauty, so that the long years it spent could nurture it gently to what it is now. Naruto said with a hushed voice, really reluctant to speak at all to not disturb the silent grace. Shikamaru turned to grin at him. Naruto, a poet, he said softly, before turning wide eyes to Naruto. Why the hell are we whispering anyways? Naruto shrugged. They continued to climb over the mountains of thick dark roots and admired their surroundings. Soon though, they had to stop and rest to catch their breaths. The huge trees had shaded them from the sun and produced its own wet coolness, but it still didn't take long for the two boys to rest from exhaustion. They sat into a large depression of a colossal tree, the largest they had seen yet. It was magnificent. Life itself seemed to breathe through the nicks, cuts and jags of the old graying bark. Naruto knew that it was his favorite. It was fortunate that a pond of clear, stunningly cold water was at the base of the tree. Naruto had not noticed it at first, until he saw the leaves and sky on the ground and found out it was the crystal reflection of what was above them. The water was perfectly still and flat, only small circles sculpted themselves on the surface whenever a drop of water dribbled from the tree onto the pond. Naruto let out a long and deep sigh, swiftly wiping away beads of sweat that had rolled down his face and dropped to the ground grateful of rest. He leaned against the rough bark of the tree and rested his eyes. But he suddenly heard a scraping noise beside him and opened his eyes tiredly to see what Shikamaru was doing. He wasn't surprised that Shikamaru was carving on the tree, but he was rather shocked by what he carved on the tree. He smiled slyly. Shikamaru, you like Ino ne? Shikamaru turned away sheepishly from his carving of his name and Ino's name on the tree and rubbed the back of his neck nervously. Kinda. but it's not like Ino would ever notice me anyways with that Sasuke around," he said with a defeated sigh. Naruto pulled himself up and laid a hand on the rough long scrapes that spelled out the names attentively. Without raising his eyes from the carving, he spoke softly. "Doesn't this place make you feel like you're in a godly presence? It's like the trees themselves were divine and watching down on us." Shikamaru nodded, though he was slightly confused at Naruto's sudden change of mood. Naruto crooked his head to a side to grin at him. "I felt strongest with this tree when I saw it, so maybe it's the most powerful, and maybe it's God that will grant your wish," he exclaimed cheerfully. Shikamaru stared at the boy whom he was brought up to hate, resent and look down upon. But maybe Naruto wasn't as bad as everyone thought. He smiled as well and nodded eagerly. "Yokata." Naruto froze all of a sudden, as did Shikamaru. "Do you hear something?" A low rumbling growl sounded behind them, shaking their very nerves as both boys stood still facing the tree, unwilling to look back. Harsh heavy breaths blew across their necks, chilling them as their skin prickled with fear. Naruto was the first to slowly turn around. His eyes narrowed, glowing with a ghting energy he needed for so long at the tall towering creature that stood in front of him. Shikamaru turned around too, though he was shivering with fear as he gazed up at the creature. The animal was somewhat like a bear, except its long slit red eyes glinted with such malice and such demonic wickedness that it shouldn't really be compared with anything at all. Large bulging muscles pulsing, with brute strength and bristling dark brown fur covered the large form. The creature's snout was raised into the air as it opened its jaws widely, showing off rows of teeth as sharp as knives, and roared a deafening ear-splitting sound. Naruto's hand quickly rested onto his kunai as he prepared himself for battle. He glanced at Shikamaru to find him breathing unevenly and his eyes bright with shielded fear. Naruto's brows raised in puzzlement. "Get your weapon out," he whispered urgently to Shikamaru, but the boy stood frozen, his eyes still fixated on the creature. "No, fool, run. This is an Asalane, a creature who causes terror even in the bravest of men. It's supposed to be extinct though, I read about it. Also about the fact that it can kill a full-fledged shinobi in less than a minute." Shikamaru turned terror-filled eyes towards Naruto. "Run." He shot off in the opposite direction as Naruto did as well mere seconds later. They were quick, but the creature was faster and more experienced. The Asalane got on all fours and raced after Naruto. Naruto ran as he had never run before, ducking past lowly hung branches and climbing over large roots. He could hear the animal bounding behind him, each astoundingly elephantine step shaking the ground itself. Damn, the Acidit or whatever the hell it was called was catching up to him. Naruto searched urgently in his mind for a way to get away when a strong lean arm wrapped around his waist and ran off in another direction in such a dashing speed that Naruto was stunned for a minute. Whoever held him agilely raced through the trees, darting around over branches and rocks as though acutely aware of everything that was around him or her. Naruto couldn't help but notice the whistle of deft air passing his ears, and the way he felt like he was almost flying. Naruto restrained a gasp when the person skillfully ducked an incoming branch that would have taken their heads off at the speed that they were going. Suddenly remembering that they were running away from something, Naruto swiftly turned his head around to see if the creature was still behind them. But there was nothing there, and his savior dashed to a stop beside a tree and dropped him heavily to the ground mercilessly. Naruto lifted his head to catch sight to whoever saved him and gasped in horror. "Sasuke!" Naruto exclaimed, shaking his head in disbelief. Sasuke didn't even spare a glance at him as he peered around the tree to see if the creature was still there. Naruto glared at him hatefully, crossing his arms over his chest. "Damn you, why did you come? I could have taken that thing down." Suddenly crouching down beside him, Sasuke gripped Naruto's chin and held his gaze level with his own blazing eyes. "Shut up, that thing could kill you in a second. Now stay quiet, it has the hearing of 10 men put together," he hissed. Tempted to punch the bastard's face in, Naruto pulled his chin free instead after shooting Sasuke a dirty look. Sasuke stood again to search for the creature, his eyes darting around alertly for any signs of movement. When there was none, he exhaled in relief and looked down at Naruto. "How the hell did you get that thing chasing after you?" Sasuke asked furiously, his eyes flaming. Naruto ignored the question and sneered. Why are you alone? Did your partner abandon you? He mocked bitterly. Sasuke stared at him in confusion for a second before he slid to the ground as well. No, we decided it would be better if we went separately. I would expect no less from the great Sasuke. Naruto muttered before looking away, increasingly uncomfortable with the fact that his goal of not speaking to Sasuke for the rest of his life wasn't successful. Sasuke made no attempt to show Naruto that he had heard his bitter comment. He only leaned back against the tree, relaxing comfortably. Naruto looked at the relaxing boy, who had his eyes closed and almost looked like he was sleeping. Then at his surroundings, suddenly hit by the fact that he had no clue where Sasuke had brought him. He and Shikamaru had pulled at twigs and did things like that to mark their trail so they could find their way back. At this point, he had two choices. Get away from Sasuke but get lost on his own, or stay with Sasuke since he was reasonably sure Sasuke knew where they were. Naruto also realized that he had left his backpack behind in his haste to run away from the Asa shithole. Damn it, he was going to have to rely on Sasuke for food and water. Naruto felt bile gather up at the pit of his throat at the thought of begging Sasuke for food. I brought extra food, Sasuke said coolly, his eyes still closed. Naruto flushed hotly. Fine, he'll just eat all his damn food and water. Thirsty, he reached for the water bottle nearby, only to have Sasuke's hand close over his. Sasuke responded clearly to his questioning glance. Drink what you need, because even though I may have extra food and water, there is still not enough for two people if one of us should drink more than we should. A sudden fury flushed Naruto's face red, and untrusting of his voice, Naruto responded in the only way he could allow himself. He reached for the bottle and raised it to his lips, pausing only briefly before he gulped it greedily, uncaring of the water that had spilled from the corner of his mouth onto his shirt. He didn't speak when Sasuke rose up, though his eyes followed every movement Sasuke had taken. Naruto remembered their last incident in his room at the temple, both of them. He can't help but feel extremely awkward. But a few minutes after Sasuke had disappeared behind the trees, Naruto was sure he'd be back since he left everything behind. He crossed his arms over his chest and fell asleep from fatigue. Sasuke swiftly walked back to where Naruto was with a pile of twigs under his arms. He looked up to the darkening sky. He needed to build the fire with haste. It was nighttime. Soon and creatures that did not dwell in the day would come out. Tossing the wood onto the ground beside where Naruto lay, he began to work diligently on making the sticks stand upright and made sure to put dry leaves underneath. With two slabs of rock he had found nearby, he smacked them together roughly for a spark. In no time, he got a crackling warm fire going. Right in time, too. The forest grew blacker by the minute. Sasuke sat down onto the ground with his legs crossed and glanced across the campfire toward the spot where Naruto was sleeping peacefully. He carefully scrutinized the boy's still face. His skin was pale, but it was softened in the sun to a healthy golden hue. His hair lay in unruly strands framing his face, the heavy gold locks seeming to hold the sun's radiance and to change into rich colors of orange under the wavy colors of the fire. Sasuke watched the long eyelashes under the closed eyelids and remembered that the boy had wide large eyes the color of the sky and finely shaped lips that formed brilliant smiles the few times when it was not occupied with sneering and making horrible faces. His gaze lingered on Naruto's face a few moments longer. He didn't forget about the passionate anger on Naruto's face the time when he yelled at him and told him that he hated him. He definitely didn't forget the aching throbs in his heart every time he saw the boy after that. Suddenly frowning, Sasuke lay down and wrapped a nearby blanket around him. He didn't know why he cared for the other boy so much. It's been like that ever since he had thrown himself in front of Naruto, taking Haku's deathly attacks when he realized he thought of Naruto as so much more. At first he thought of it as only a growing respect for the boy. But what really is respect to him? Naruto's eyelids suddenly fluttered open in a childlike innocence and looked around. Sasuke held his breath when those wide bright blue orbs stared at him before they narrowed. Sasuke frowned sternly, knitting his brows in thought before he spoke. Cook the food. I found the meat and the cooking supplies are mine. Since you will probably eat my food, then do your share. Sasuke ordered diplomatically. Naruto stared at him a minute before he looked at the lifeless furry animal on the ground a few feet away from him. He shivered in repulsion. You killed it, so cook it yourself. Naruto retorted in mild indignation, refusing to react to the flash of anger in Sasuke's eyes. His dark eyes turning to ice, Sasuke looked the hair by the ears and took his kunai out. Unwilling to add me, that he did not have the stomach to even watch someone skin an innocent creature, Naruto flipped over to face the tree and fell asleep once again. His stomach was growling. Naruto sat silently across the campfire. Not having moved an inch from where he previously sat, he watched Sasuke chew the last remains of the roasted meat. Naruto's stomach growled angrily again, but he couldn't tear his eyes away. Sasuke didn't look at him as he cut another slice from the roasting carcass over top the fire and continued to eat. Naruto stared at the few pieces remaining hungrily, the tantalizing aroma wafting from the meat and the sight of the juices sizzling as it dripped into the fire tortured him long enough. Naruto opened his mouth to order a piece from Sasuke, but closed his mouth once again in fear of lost dignity. Sasuke had eaten one piece after another without offering him any. Watching Sasuke's even teeth sink into the savory meat had him so deeply absorbed he could almost taste it. Almost. Naruto quickly turned away to avoid his glance when Sasuke looked up to him, almost seething at the amusement he knew was in those dark eyes. Gah, he was enjoying this. Naruto pretended to be interested in his shadowy surroundings before his stomach rumbled loudly again and Naruto cursed under his breath. But Sasuke ignored it and Naruto was silently enraged. If that bastard thought he would beg him for something to eat, he had better think twice. He'd starve to death first. Naruto reached for the water bottle. Water should keep his stomach quiet enough. But he couldn't hold down a gasp when Sasuke leaned over and snatched it right back from his grasp without a word. Naruto was furious, but who cared, right? He could last a night without food, but he also remembered that he skipped both breakfast and lunch in his haste and was starving. He deliberately averted his gaze when Sasuke removed the remaining meat from the fire, which was still sizzling from the heat, and carefully wrapped it up in paper. Hunger gnawing, Naruto looked away, not at all eager to even see the other boy. Sasuke knew Naruto was hungry. He wasn't deaf. He had heard the constant rumbling of his traitorous stomach countless times. But he had found the food, lit the fire, prepared the meat and cooked it, while Naruto's unyielding attitude stopped him from helping at all. The boy just watched, unwilling to contribute to the camp. Well, he certainly got his punishment. Sasuke couldn't get the sight of Naruto's look on his face, though, when the delicious aroma had first started to fill the clearing, and felt compelled to give him the last piece of food. But Naruto needed to learn his lesson, and lessons were hard learned. Sasuke laid down to his side and pulled his blanket over himself. He didn't close his eyes though. He knew he wasn't going to get much sleep that night. Naruto muttered a soft unintelligible sound when he felt someone nudging him in the back. Turning over to his side, Naruto continued to sleep when a harsh kick hit against his shoulder and he woke up in alarm. Naruto, wake up! Over him, Sasuke unblinkingly stared down with his emotionless dark eyes and Naruto flinched from the closeness of them. Quickly rolling away, Naruto bent up slowly, rubbing his sore back. Naya, what time is it? He complained. He frowned when he got no reply, silently cursing as hunger hit him sharply. He got up to his feet and shot a glare at Sasuke's already departing figure where he walked at a leisurely pace without looking back. Vowing vengeance, Naruto followed. The afternoon sun bore down on them mercilessly, growing hotter by the second. Even the trees couldn't shade them from the humidity that swept through the air. Naruto swaggered forward, drops of perspiration dripped down his face. Thirsty, hungry and footsore, he still continued to follow Sasuke a few feet behind as the other boy continued steady progress towards an unknown destination. Sasuke had stopped earlier at a small clearly running stream to refill his water bottle, but did not say a word when Naruto had run up and crouched down to drink and satisfy the thirst that had become unbearable. But Naruto's anxious growling of his stomach has not ceased yet, and Naruto couldn't stand the looks Sasuke shot him every time it did. Sasuke knew he was hungry and wanted to make him suffer. Naruto began to hate Sasuke more and more, despite the fact that he knew he had brought it onto himself. Intensely aware of the person stumbling behind him, Sasuke continued to direct his attention ahead. He knew he should be stopping by now, but he was not yet feeling fatigue, so why should he? But Sasuke couldn't ignore the nagging at the back of his head, reminding him that Naruto hasn't eaten yet and didn't have the energy to go on. Sasuke didn't stop though, because he was still firm on the fact that Naruto had brought it onto himself with his damn stubbornness. So he drank knowing that Naruto was thirsty. Ate when he knew the boy was hungry. Even though he ate more than his fill, Sasuke realized that both his hunger and thirst has not been satisfied yet. The long day continued and Sasuke continued on without resting. Naruto staggering visibly behind him. The distance between them began to lengthen as Sasuke had the strength to jump over roots and branches easily, while Naruto began to find it more and more difficult to take each step. When terrain began to slope, Sasuke with great difficulty forced down the inclination to walk faster, knowing that Naruto would never catch up. But he wouldn't rest yet, and Sasuke pressed on. Naruto tiredly set one foot ahead of the other, trying in vain to catch up to Sasuke or at least keep in sight of him. Halting briefly, he realized the grumbling of his stomach had ceased, though he was still agonizingly hungry. Suddenly, he didn't seem so hungry, in fact his feet weren't even sore anymore. A strange darkness was rapidly veiling him, taking him to a place where he felt no discomfort. Naruto didn't even have time to think as darkness abruptly embraced him. The sun began to set and Sasuke decided it would almost be time to rest. They had been walking for the whole day and to Sasuke's great disappointment, they haven't come across anything to fight against. Sasuke had been looking forward to the trip, knowing it was a good chance to test his skills as Iruka had said. But all he found were pitiful animals that weren't even worth eating and creatures like the one Naruto had come upon, which he knew he could beat but would take too much strength off him. He paused when he reached a large indentation in a tree and found it a good place to spend the night. When he stepped closer for a better look, he found that there was a pond there good for drinking. As well as, Sasuke took several leaps over branches to get to the base of the tree and found a carving there. Naruto and Shikamaru had been there, he mused. Suddenly, he realized that it's been long and Naruto still wasn't there yet. His heart began to pound slowly as he waited for what seemed like an eternity, but Naruto had still not arrived. Feeling too concerned to wait any longer, Sasuke began to run back to where he had come from. His concern began to rise when he walked quite a distance without seeing Naruto. How the hell could he have not been watching him? Knowing of Naruto's state, Sasuke remembered painfully of what happened before when Naruto had ran out into the rain. The fact that this time, it was his fault made it 10 times harder. Sasuke began to pick up his pace, running through the trees when he stopped so suddenly he nearly fell over. He found the boy lying motionless on the grass. Naruto! He exclaimed loudly, beside him in a second. Sasuke quickly turned Naruto over and felt for a pulse in his wrist. Relief flooded him when he found life throbbing and did not hesitate to slip an arm around him and sweep the boy into his arms. Then he ran as quickly as he could to his intended camp. Sasuke gently pressed a towel he had dipped onto the thankfully cool water of the small pond against Naruto's feverish forehead. Then he began to wash it down his face, happy when the paleness brightened to a soft pink hue on the cheeks. Naruto slowly opened his eyes as he awoke, raising his chin with meager defiance when he saw Sasuke over him. He was shocked to find that there was hardly any strength in him. He tried to sit up, and when Sasuke bent over in a flash to help him, Naruto led him though he stiffed exceptionally. What happened? Naruto asked groggily. You fainted, Sasuke said simply, before he placed the wet towel into Naruto's hands. Put this against your face, it should help you feel better. Sasuke explained coldly, his eyes suddenly devoid of the worry Naruto had seen seconds ago. But Sasuke crouched down quickly to open the packet of meat he had prepared earlier and held it out towards him. Naruto took it without a word of thanks and chewed on it as he watched Sasuke work silently around the camp. He prepared the fowl he had captured earlier on for cooking and replenished the weight. Bottles with the fresh water of the pond. Naruto realized with a start that he was where he had been with Shikamaru the day before, though everything looked quite different at night. He glanced back beside him and recognized the carving. It brought a smile to his lips as he finished the last bit of his meat. The smile disappeared though when he found Sasuke stalking towards him and immediately edged away. What? His heart began to pound when Sasuke crouched down beside him, his handsome face level with his as he took a pouch from his pocket and gently pulled one of Naruto's feet into his hands. Naruto fought the temptation to pull it away immediately, and he really would have too, except his foot burned with pain every time he moved it the slightest. What are you doing? Naruto demanded angrily. Sasuke looked up at him briefly and examined his foot with dark eyes before dipping his finger into the pouch to spread a clear gel onto his sore foot. Naruto gasped. The relief was instantaneous. But he couldn't keep the anger out of his eyes. What's wrong with you? First you cause the injury, then you try and heal it. Naruto shouted bitterly. I didn't cause the wounds, they came from your stubbornness. It wasn't my damn idea to walk for the entire day straight without stopping even once for a rest. Naruto snatched back his foot and glared at Sasuke. I guess you'll blame me for letting you go hungry as well. It is your fault. You didn't do your share, so you won't get your share of the food. You still can't starve someone to death. Are you dead? Both of them argued, breathing heavily in anger. You want me dead, don't you? Naruto yelled finally, his heart pounding and throat tight. The intensity of Sasuke's gaze suddenly deepened, and Naruto felt a shudder run through him as the other boy whispered. I would never want you dead. Shaken by his gaze, Naruto frowned at him, making a face. But Sasuke had already gotten up and returned to the fire, where a fowl was roasting. Sasuke began to tend to the meat, carefully turning it every so often so that it wouldn't burn or overcook. He could feel the heat of Naruto's bright eyes on him, watching him intently, and tried not to look back. Naruto's words of accusation had hurt him a lot in ways he could not comprehend, even though Sasuke hated to admit it. He was startled from his thoughts when dripping from the fowl touched the fire, causing the flames to surge upward suddenly, searing the fowl's flesh. He quickly plucked the fowl out of the fire and placed it onto a cloth. Watching the liquids darken the sheet it was on, Sasuke paused a bit before he turned around to Naruto, the roasted bird in his hand. He noticed that Naruto remained silent when he placed the bird on the blanket. Though his eyes were questioning. Am I to assume you're giving me something to eat after starving me for a night? Naruto asked boldly, his eyes still holding that stubborn defiance. Without even waiting for a reply, he snapped, are you going to torture me again this time? Snatch it away if I try to eat it. Sasuke rolled tired eyes as he replied. No, I will not do that. Then why are you so generous today when you let me go hungry yesterday, bastard? Because you shouldn't receive what you don't earn. What did I do today then? This is different. How? Sasuke paused for a bit before he gazed at Naruto carefully. I didn't mean to hurt you, Naruto. Struggling to ignore the sudden breathlessness that Sasuke's soft pronunciation of his name elicited. Naruto looked away quickly into the dark shadows of the trees around them. He didn't hear anything from Sasuke for a minute, though he felt the dark eyes that bore into him like he understood everything about Naruto. But he didn't. Feeling something being dropped onto his legs, Naruto turned around to find the meat in his lap and Sasuke already on the ground with a blanket tucked around him. Naruto watched the steady rising and lowering of Sasuke's slight outline of torso with every breath he took for a while. He finally turned his eyes away. He looked to the meat instead and took a large bite, uncaring of the juices that ran down his chin. When he finished his meat and lay down comfortably onto his back, Naruto found his eyes straying towards Sasuke's form again. He opened his mouth to say something, but realized that the other boy was probably already asleep. So he dropped his head and fell into a deep sleep. Next to him, a little while later, when Sasuke was sure Naruto was sleeping, he got up slowly, careful not to make a sound, and pulled a blanket from a nearby bag. Leaning over to tenderly tuck the blanket around Naruto, he stared almost longingly at him before letting out a sigh. Naruto. The next morning, when Naruto woke up, Sasuke was already gone. Naruto figured Sasuke had known that he would know how to get back out of the forest at that point. But Naruto found himself almost disappointed at his rival's absence. Seeing a slab of meat at his side, he picked it up and ate it quickly. He heard the rustling of cloth underneath his chin and saw a clean blue blanket bunched up at his thigh. He carefully dusted the blanket off and took the corners into his fingers before he stretched it out and took a deep breath out of it. It smelled like Sasuke. Naruto felt a smile tug at his lips as he folded the blanket up and tucked it underneath his arm. Maybe he should forgive Sasuke. Naruto decided, before a grin broke on his face and he leapt up to get out of the dreadful forest. Suddenly, Shikamaru, you're alive, eh? Yes. Joy. Happiness. To be continued, and thank you for watching.